Welcome to another episode of Coder Conversations. Today we have Angelica Baca, uh, Activision Blizzard UX designer and researcher. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Hey, thanks for coming on tonight.
So, yeah, just to get things started, can you give us a little bit about your background and what you currently do at your company right now?
Yeah, it's kind of a long background, but currently, yeah, I'm a UX designer. I also help out with research. I've been in the gaming industry for almost 13 years at this point. But it's been a long journey for sure, going from QA role into learning about UX and UR, self-teaching myself all that stuff and managing to get myself into these roles. And
Oh wow,
well, the
that's
majority of my
impressive.
experience, yeah, it's not easy.
Yeah.
I'm currently helping out with actually Activision's website team. So if you play Call of Duty, I help out with the website for that right now, which is a little bit different for me, but still tied into games.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. So, yeah, you mentioned that you were self-taught. So, can you give us a little bit of insight on that process? Like, did you just watch courses on Udemy, and how did you transition that into an actual job?
Yeah, so let me tell you about how I got in the industry first, because that's how it started. I actually went to school for art history. My goal was to get into art conservation. So if you guys ever watched like Ghostbusters 2, like the original ones,
Oh
and
yeah.
they're like restoring the paintings, that's what I wanted to do.
Awesome.
Yeah, without the possession and all that stuff. But
Right,
I
right.
I I went to school here in Washington. I'm in the Seattle area. And as soon as I got out, it was 2008, and recession time, and it was really hard to find
Recession.
jobs.
Yeah,
So
recession hit hard.
yeah, it was a hard time to find things, and I mean we're seeing it again for young folks right now. But I hopped around in different types of industries. I was looking into doing some more art related things. So I did some like framing for artwork. I helped out with nonprofits in their offices. I did volunteering work. I did hospital work in their
Wow.
foundations departments. So helping with fundraising and all that stuff.
You've
And
been you've been all over the map.
yeah, I worked at an acupuncture clinic for a while, and then I had a friend over here that I went to school with who was working at Bungie in QA, and he was like, "Hey, this could be
Nice.
a job." And I was like, "No, that's not a real job. I don't know what you're talking about."
Uh,
So I ended up getting a contract role with Big Fish Games, if you guys know them. But that was in their customer service department. So I didn't have anything to do with the dev teams. I'd sit in the basement and I'd answer phone calls all day about people that were asking about membership programs.
oh, I
Um,
see. What kind of games are they? Like an indie game developer?
so they were a publisher at that time. And so kind of help out with that stuff. They do a lot of PC things. So if you play like hidden object games, if you've ever heard of like Fairway Solitaire, I think was one of their big ones at that time. Those are the people that you would find that for. So they used to do, I don't know
Got
if
it.
they do that, but they do subscriptions so you can play games monthly and just do all that stuff, and pretty family friendly type things.
Very
But
cool. Very cool.
around that time, I knew I had to get a jaw surgery. So I went and did that jaw surgery, and it knocked me out. Like it uh, almost killed me. I had an
Wow.
accident that happened during that, and so it was a really rough recovery. And so
And
while I was there,
why did you have to get surgery to begin with?
yeah, it's not something you usually go leaping for, right? But it's I was doing it
Yeah.
for an overbite that I knew at some point I would have to do. And so I waited until after college to do it because I was like, I don't want to do this, while I'm in school. So
Yeah, no, I can understand that.
yeah, but you're in that deadline of like, I got to get it done before your insurance runs out when you're on your parents' insurance at the time. So I had to meet that deadline.
Right. And
And
did they prescribe opiates or what was the treatment like afterwards?
it was a lot of rest. I had my mouth wired shut. And so basically what I was trying to do is gain weight back. I had lost, I'm already about like 130 pounds right now. I was 108 when
Oh,
I
wow.
had this surgery. And so I was just trying to figure out how to get food in me. So I would eat out of a syringe. And my birthday was a couple days after that. So for my birthday, we blended up a cheeseburger because I really missed the taste of ketchup.
Uh, yeah.
Yeah, it's terrible. Don't do that.
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend that.
No, it's good to try once out of curiosity, but no, it's not good. Um,
Yeah.
but
I'm
during this
sorry to hear
time,
that. Sorry to hear
yeah,
that. It's traumatic.
it's traumatic, and it's one of those things that defines everything else later on in life. So if you're gonna get jaw surgery, just do your research. I think most of the time you don't end up in my situation, but I was one of those.
That's
But
tough.
oh, go ahead.
Oh no, no, I was just waiting for you to finish
Oh
your.
yeah. So while I had my mouth wired shut, I knew I couldn't find a job where I was going to be talking on phones again. And so I started looking on Craigslist and I saw a role that said, hey, QA experience or QA role in the games industry, no experience necessary. And it being on Craigslist and saying that you don't need the experience, I thought it was a scam. Um, but I thought it would be funny to apply anyway. So I did. And I actually got a call back and they said, hey, so let's get you into the office and we'll talk to you, and here's where you can find us and all that.
Right, right.
I get in there with my mouth still wired shut, so I'm trying to talk between my teeth, and I'm super nervous because I've never been in a game studio, like with the devs and all this stuff before. And I sit in a room with a bunch of people. Felt like a lot of people, at least. There's probably at least 8 people in the room.
Oh,
And
wow.
yeah, I'm sitting in the middle of them. And they're just like, okay, here's your resume. Tell us about your experience at Microsoft. And I said, I never worked at Microsoft. And they said, it says Microsoft on your resume. Is this your resume? And I said, no, that's not my resume. That's somebody else's resume.
Oh, that's
But they had the same first name that I did, and it's not a very common first name around here. So
right.
they said, "Oh my God, we're so sorry. Since you're here, let's find your resume and just tell us about yourself." And so I, talking to
Yeah.
my team, was like, just got out of college. I did, this and that type of thing. But what I did after college was I volunteer for the museums. And so when I was doing this stuff, I would sit
Nice.
in the basement of the museums and I would document all the stuff that I can find that were imperfections in the pieces that I would find. So if I'm looking at like um, ink works or something, I'm looking for tears, I'm looking for mold spots, I'm measuring out all this stuff and I'm documenting all this stuff. And I told them that, and I told
Sounds
them about
sounds highly detailed.
it's highly detailed. And it's exactly this type of thing that you're going to be doing as a QA person. And so they said,
Uh,
I think we can take you in. We'll train you on the job. And so I got the job, and I learned everything about the gaming industry just by being there, just by doing it and observing people.
That's great because a lot of places it's more like sink or swim. I got brought into programming and they were just like, okay, like just start building out these features and React. And I'm like, wait a second here. I'm a junior developer. I need mentorship. And they're like, oh, we don't have time to take our senior dev off of his project to train you. So that's great that you got training because it seems like it's kind of rare nowadays.
Well, it was interesting too, because I remember getting in there and yeah, we did like Scrum training, and I'm like, what's Scrum? That sounds like some sort of weird dog. I don't know what that is. Um, but yeah, I had one person saying, oh, I hope you do better than the last person, do a good job. And I said, well, what does it mean to do a good job? And they said, well, just do a good job. And I'm like, I don't know what this is. Like, I'm not sure how to grade myself
Yeah.
on this. But by being with other people that had been in the industry for a while, and I got to work closely with, I got to learn from them. I got to learn with my first team that I was with, and this was at Glue Mobile back in the day. had a lot of female developers as well, and so that was actually really nice to see and be in that environment, because you hear a lot about what that environment's like for different companies, different studios. So
Right.
I
Yeah,
had
it's
a nice
mostly like
introduction.
male dominated primarily, right?
Yep, yep. And with all the places that I've been, because I have been at a number of studios around here because of QA work mostly. Yeah, different studios have different cultures. So,
Right.
but your example of not having somebody to guide you on that stuff, that's how it was for me a bit with the UX thing. So
Oh wow.
like you mentioned, I did have to do a lot of reading. Like I had asked a couple folks nearby me who were doing that type of work, and I said, can you help me learn? And they didn't have time. They just, they're like, well, I'm sure you're going to catch on, or maybe you should look into just regular game design stuff. Like UX is pretty niche, and we
Right.
don't always have the extra availability for that. Like make yourself a little bit more open to this other type of design, and you're going to find more roles that way. But because I had learned about art history, and I was really interested in people and culture because of all that stuff, I just felt this draw to UX, and so I was like, no, I'm going to stick with this, and I'm just going to learn wherever I can. So I
Yeah, I could see that. You could definitely see that.
So, did you experience a lot of anxiety, like during the learning process when your skills weren't fully up to par? Like, how did you avoid kind of feeling like burnt out or fearful, while getting your skills up?
Oh, I mean, I think that's a constant thing for people in design. I think there's so much to learn that I don't think you can ever feel like fully comfortable that you know everything. And it's not our job to know everything.
Right.
But
Yeah.
I mean, like even now, like as far as UX goes, if you look into that discipline, there's so many things that are getting asked from folks. And these days, people are looking for UI, expecting them to know UX. There are folks like me who are a little bit more UX driven, but I also help out with user research, which is its own discipline as well. So you kind of have to pick and choose what your strengths are. And then if you're open to it, expand yourself a bit more too if you want to become a journalist. But I think people expect so many unicorns when there aren't as many as they think.
Right.
So, like
That's interesting.
for the audience who may not be aware, what's the difference between like UI, UX, and some of the other similar roles?
So I think I saw that you do music, right?
That's Brian. Yeah, he
That's
does music.
me. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's sort of hard to explain what an experience is, but I think you can think of it like music, of like, well, what is music? Like you're feeling these sensations, you're listening to certain things, you're making memories, feeling emotions.
It's like
So
this visceral.
yep, exactly. That's essentially what UX is that we're thinking about that the scenarios that a person is going through. And for games, it's connecting your designer's wants for what they want out of a level, out of the game, out of anything that they're working on, um, and being the in between of this is what they want. Here's how the players are experiencing this. How do we make that connect? How do we make that work as we want it to? Um, for UI, that's all the tactile stuff. That is your records. If you're playing records, that's your instruments. If you're playing instruments, for games, it's a lot of HUDs. It's a lot of interfaces with menus, with navigating through things. That it gets a little bit into UX as well. Um,
Right.
but all the stuff that you touch, you interact with, and the feedback that you get from that stuff.
Oh, awesome. So, like, is UX like really where you feel like you're gonna settle down, or do you eventually want to transition to any other area within gaming?
I am on such a roller coaster ride that I'm open to anything, but I'm excited to be where I'm at right now.
That's good.
Awesome. So, like, can you tell us about some of the challenges you faced in your career and how did you overcome them?
Well, a lot of my experiences, I mean, like I said, I did 9 years in QA, and that went from contracting to full time to management at one point. So there's a lot of different challenges that you can experience through that. But I mean, within games, the hardest one for QA, I think, is, um, and now you see it with everyone else too, is you don't always get to stay as long as everyone else does. Like, you're usually the first on the chopping block for whenever there's a layoff that comes around. So when
Right.
I got my first job, I had just been hired on as a contractor, made it into full time, and a month after I got my full time status, they had layoffs, and I was the first one out the door because I was the last one in.
'Cause you're
But
the last
For
one
people
in.
for people
Yeah.
who don't know, QA 9 years in QA is effectively a prison stint.
no, not always. There are folks that will go in expecting that they want to transition into other roles, and I mean, especially we had DigiPan over here, so a lot of folks are like, how do you break into games? QA being an avenue for doing that, but they have other things in mind. But it can be a career of its own, and the way that I always approached it is I think of it as sleuthing. Like, it's all a science. You're documenting things like a scientist would. You're looking for your hypothesis and your results and all that stuff. But I love puzzles and I love problem solving. And so for someone like me who can do that and be able to experience so many things, be able to talk to the devs, it's not a bad thing if people want to do it.
That's awesome.
So yeah, to get into the QA thing. So what did you like about QA and what did you not like and what made you like eventually transition over to UX?
I think the thing I like best about QA and just in general, but especially with QA, are the people that you work with. Like, I feel like QA in particular is kind of like a wolf pack. You know, you do it as a team, maybe more than some of the other disciplines at some points, because you're often scrambling to get things done at a certain time. There's a lot to go over. We did everything manually. We didn't have automation for most of the stuff that I did, and so you're trusting each other, you're communicating with each other, you're talking to the devs, but you're building good bonds out of that too. Because in certain cases, when you're working late and over time, you get a little bit crazy because you're like, oh, I've been sitting here for so long and doing all this stuff. So
Yeah,
you gotta have good company for that.
So I know
absolutely.
the programmers they can be sometimes be antisocial. So did you ever have to like resolve any conflicts or use your emotional intelligence to be able to kind of reduce any conflicts with maybe some programmers who are a little testy?
I think I've had a couple situations where that might have come up, but I think, I mean, for me in general, I've always been a little bit chatty in the dev environment. Like, as a QA person, when I first got in, I was told that, and this might have been more of an old-fashioned thing, but if you're a QA person, we don't talk to the devs. Like, you stay on your side, they stay on their side. And I said, I don't understand why that's a thing. And so I would talk to the devs. Um, so
Interesting.
that carried on with me with, I think, every job that I've been to. Is I get to know the people that I work with, and it makes it easier to work with them, and it's easier to have some fun, but be able to get things done, because you know what they can do, they know what you can do, and they know that you can work together.
Yeah, I think that's
The
really important to know your coworkers.
one thing that I would add to that is it's one of the most significant cost and time reduction savers that you can do is actually directly communicating with the dev teams on a regular basis, especially any devs that you're directly supporting, because it significantly reduces their testing time and
Mm,
assessment times. And it's actually quite frustrating as someone who's been a lead developer for teams, having to work with other QA developers, especially QA dev leads, and wondering why we don't have regular reoccurring weekly meetings about testing and testing cycles. And I've never understood it. if we don't work together, it substantially increases everyone's workloads, typically for no reason, and it kills timelines. Like you can kiss project deadlines goodbye if you don't do it.
Yeah, and it may just be a bit of like, how many people do you have on your project? We want to make sure that, you only get the most representative people in the room for that stuff, because you'd have too many people to go through with all that. But I do agree that it's much easier to get stuff done when you are able to just, whether that's remotely or not, get in a room and chat it out with folks.
There should be that open line of communication. Absolutely.
So yeah, what are some of the insights you can share with us from communicating directly with the developers?
I don't know about insights, but I encourage people that I work with, especially QA folks, that if they're afraid to talk to the devs, like, yeah, feel free. Like, we want to hear that feedback, and your best testers, and not even just testers, but best people that you work with are the ones that are open to, giving their feedback on things. It doesn't have to be an opinion of, I think this is right because of this. But even as a UX person, we want to hear the different experiences of everyone because we all experience things differently. So if one person
Right.
sees a thing this way and another person doesn't, let's look into that and what we can do to accommodate for other folks that may be going through any of those situations.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
So yeah, you've been working on the Call of Duty website. Is that correct?
Yes. Yep.
Sure. So can you tell us a little bit about what you do, like on a day-to-day basis, and how that directly applies to what we see on the website?
It's going to be a little bit hard because we are making some changes right now. But currently, you keep up with Call of Duty. We recently had the announcement and the beta for Black Ops 6, and so we're the folks on our little team that are putting up the images that we get from our marketing groups. We work very closely with the marketing groups for this team. We are currently looking at any changes that we want to make to our sites to make sure that things are easily navigatable, to make sure that we're making good pathways for folks that are newer to the game and are looking for information of like just what is this, how does this work, can I get some good tips for things, to people
Sure.
who are more senior and like, hey, I just want to get in there, maybe look for some things that'll help with strategy or look for
Yeah.
my COD points or something like that.
Nice.
So anything on that website is stuff that we're looking at. And so my duties have been kind of a combination of helping to get these things plugged in, helping with the layouts and all that, but also looking into, how do I get feedback from actual people that are using our sites, actual people that are playing the games, to help us guide our site to be more user-friendly.
Now, would you say you're doing UI as well as the UX?
Um, I would say yes, because like a lot of the images that we put up are interactable. You're looking at some of the animations and effects that you're putting into there as well. Um, so yeah, I think it's a combination of both of those for this one.
That's great.
So yeah, for somebody looking to get into a big company doing UX design, what should they be versed on to be ready to just get up and go?
Trying to get into a big company is a challenge in itself. Like, I think the easiest way to break in is probably to go for the smaller ones first and then work your way up into a larger one. But that doesn't mean that can't happen. Um, Within my group here, which is not the game group, but with the web and marketing side of it, um, not even all these people are necessarily gamers. When you're going into a game dev role, they're definitely looking for people that have played games and enjoy either their products or similar type of genres. So depending on if you're going for the actual game dev side of things, show your passion, show that you can do the work. So if you're making your own examples, Make sure that you include those into your portfolio. Get some volunteer experience in there if you need to. Build your own games if you're up to it. And if you're looking for the non-dev roles, it helps to have the passion for the games, but it's not as necessary as being on the dev team.
I can see that.
Awesome. So how important is a portfolio to get in that job, and should people be willing to do like free projects to build up their portfolio?
I think it's almost a requirement these days to have a portfolio in order to get yourself in the door for not only just game stuff, but outside of games as well, because it shows where your focus is, what you can do. And for someone like me, I'm more of a strategist than a visual person. And so I have to give a little bit more of a breakdown of like, okay, here's a case study of something I've done. Here's the thought process we went through. Here are the actual steps that we went through to get there. Here are the issues that have come up during that, and how did we adjust to that, and what is the final outcome.
Well,
So
yeah, so it sounds very highly detailed.
it's a very highly detailed type of position. I apparently keep getting myself into these things.
Do you
But
feel? Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
no, go ahead, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to ask, do you feel like a lot of times, like UX, is that kind of overlooked by companies, or do you feel like they're accorded their proper respect?
I wouldn't say it's a matter of respect. I think it's a matter of understanding. I think there are certain companies that, well, UX has been around for a while, but I think UI has been a term that's been around for longer. And when there wasn't a full status of UX within games, it was usually the game designers that were doing the UI and probably thinking about the UX as well. And so I think it kind of developed later on where they're like, okay, so we can have somebody just focused on the UI. I think it's kind of implied that they kind of did the UX or maybe shared it with the game designers at that time too.
Right.
But more and more, it's become its own discipline. We even have our own, conferences for games, UX conferences, which discuss UX, UI, UR, but open to any discipline. It just is more focused on that stuff. So there are more and more people who are saying, hey, UX, UI, we're our own disciplines. We can do both, but they are separate things.
For our listeners, can you explain what UR is?
UR is user research. So while you can do user research as a UX or UI person, there are people who can be fully dedicated to user research. So if you ever hear about folks who do the play tests, bringing people in and just say, hey, we have this thing, we want you to play this build and give us feedback. Those are your user researchers. And I did have a little bit of a job working with WB Games for a while, helping with their lab testing. So I got to experience that in the larger labs. I've done it for smaller groups, and I'm working with our team here at Activision for setting us up for web stuff, web testing as well.
Oh wow! So you've worn many hats in your career so far.
Yeah, that's why I'm open.
No, that's great. That's great.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. So yeah, so getting into gaming, have you always been a gamer, or is that something you got into recently?
No, I've been gaming for a while. I think my first system that I owned was a Genesis, but I had an uncle who had the SNES, and so I think the games that I remember that first really got me started into all this stuff, even though there were probably some before that, were Streets of Rage 2 and Mortal Kombat were big ones in our family.
Awesome.
So I grew up playing a lot of fighting games. I really like my platformers. You start off with like Sonic the Hedgehog and all that stuff. And as a kid, I remember getting, and I don't know if many people know this game. There was a game called Tempest 3X, which was like a remake of an older arcade game called Tempest. And I love that game for whatever reason. It's very simple. It's a lot of geometric shapes, and you're basically trying to get to the end of a track without hitting anything. And when I got that for Christmas, I cried, and I was just like, "Oh my God, I'm so happy." But yeah, I've stuck to my PlayStation as my console, so I played a lot of that. Um, and
Were you
I think
ever into like Final Fantasy, RPGs?
I not as much. I find for me that it's a little bit too repetitive for me, which is weird because there are other repetitive games that I'm totally fine with. But I think for Final Fantasy, I never got into that because one, I got into it late. And so when you go back and you play some of those older games, you look at the user experience and you're like, I don't know what this is. It doesn't explain this to me. And
Right.
I feel stuck. But back in the day, you had to, kind of trudge through all that stuff. And it was about that difficulty of making it through and discovery. But these days, I don't think we have as much
Right.
patience for that.
That's interesting.
Logan, did you have any questions?
No, one thing I would like to add to the conversation, though, from a value perspective, is it's very important to understand the difference between UI, UR, and UX. They are extremely different in skill sets, even though most often people use them interchangeably. That is a severe mistake to make, one that you will regret. UX is very, very much so driven towards users actually experiencing the application in terms of their feedback from the application's use itself. UI is the actual development of the interface. And UR is collecting the information and being able to take that data, generate valuable value add feedback to that, and then provide that to both UI and UX developers for the purposes of improving the application itself. And it's very, very important to understand the difference of the three, because it depends on what you want to do. It will directly dictate where you go. So I would say put a lot of emphasis towards what you enjoy, because UX and the U series itself is an extremely painful experience. I would absolutely caution people, if you like back end, you're like, oh yeah, I like to build functions and calls and security controls and all kinds of back end APIs. UI and UX are not for the faint of heart. It will eat your soul.
Yeah, did you
I'm
want
glad,
to?
yeah, you're a UX advocate, and I'm thankful for that, because I think every time that someone thinks UX is UI, or thinks UI is UX, I think there's a little part of us that dies. So
Yeah, no, I get that.
So, do you want to actually do UX for like an actual video game? Is that something you're hoping to transition into?
oh, for me,
Yes.
I have actually done UX for 2 companies right now. So I helped out back at that Big Fish company, which I started off with when I was doing customer service for them. I worked with them doing UX on one of their mobile products. And I also did UX for Kerbal Space Program too.
Oh wow, awesome. So, what does it look like
Nice.
actually doing UX on a video game?
I think it's a challenge, and that's what makes it fun, because I like painting apparently. But it's about getting creative a little bit more for me, because I mean, working on websites, there are a lot of standard patterns that you will go through, but um,
Yeah,
you have patterns and all that stuff. You can look at genres and different games of the past, and you see things that are relatable and almost expected in some cases. But you're always trying to innovate, and you're trying to make it so that it ties into whatever story or environment or feel that you're trying to do. So it's different in that way.
I want to
interesting.
add a caveat. Anyone who feels or believes that UX should ignore the fact that there are 4 and 5 and 6 layers of nested tabs. I openly advocate for you being hunted down mercilessly and tased repeatedly.
Hmm.
If I see that in your application design, I will cry.
Yeah, I mean that's one of the things is are we making it simple for folks to do what they want to do? You can look at UX for something as simple as anything that you do during a day. Like I think I remember explaining to my parents because it's like they're like, "What do you do?" I was like, "Okay, well we're at a parking meter. Like let's look at this parking meter. Like, do you understand the directions that they're giving you? Because some of these things are kind of crazy. You're like, why I put this in, it doesn't make sense." And I'm like, this is what I do.
Right.
I try to make sure this doesn't happen.
Yeah.
So, okay, this question is related to UX, but it also seems like a tangent. But can you name like one of the games that you've been recently playing that you really enjoyed?
So actually, I just started a couple days ago the Astrobot game. Have you guys seen that one?
Oh yeah, it's a great game.
Yeah, it was surprisingly good. I had a friend who told me about it because I remember I think they had the previous one, which is a little bit more of a demo, and I was like, wait, they made a game, and they're like, yeah, it's actually really good. It's like Mario Odyssey, and I was like, all right, we'll check it out. And I'm
Oh, nice.
surprised by all the references that they had in it, especially as a PlayStation player. Of like, oh, I liked God of War, and so I was happy that they had a number of references to that. And you look at the way that they designed some of their levels, and you're like, okay, see the inspiration they took from that. I see the art that they take from this, pulling a lot of things together and making it something new. But I also thought it was really cool that they showed how you're building your PlayStation actual hardware, because I've only built a computer once and I still don't know how I did that. So
Yeah.
they're they're
Highly
making it,
technical.
yeah, they're making it educational, but they're also making it really fun. But it's not an easy feat to do something like that. You think something's simple, but there's a lot of work that goes into making something simple.
Oh, absolutely. Do you see yourself continuing on the UX track, or what do you see your future as?
I I think I do, but because I also have a lot of folks that are telling me, "Hey, you're almost production driven," especially because of my background in QA and all that stuff. I could see it deviating in some way to that,
Yeah.
but yeah, I have no idea.
Point of order,
That's not a bad thing.
famous last words of any UI developer is let's add a simple feature to the interface.
Yeah, that's I think it's a constant thing of well, I've had a couple of those battles before, and they're like, okay, no, let's talk about this. How does this interact with everything else? How does this interact with these other menus that you go into? You got to think about the localization. You got to think about the different devices that you're using, the screen real estate that you're using, but you're also thinking forward to like, hey, we're going to be adding more into this game too. Like if we add more UI, more stuff on this HUD, where is that stuff going to go? So we need to be
And the
smart
load
about this.
times.
Yep. Yeah.
A lot of people don't consider the load times when putting things into play. And a very simple widget could all of a sudden add an incredibly sophisticated query on the back end, where it's the feature itself may be simple, but the back end load may not be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Performance starts lagging for that stuff, and as a player, you get frustrated because you're waiting for a long time.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, taking it back to Astrobot, I feel like that was incredibly well designed. The whole experience is seamless. So, from your opinion, what do you think they did well in terms of UX, and what do you think they could improve?
Um, as far as UX goes, I think they did a really good job. Like, the feel of you being able to navigate all this stuff is pretty natural for the most part. I think the hardest part of that sometimes is some of the angles that you land into for some of these puzzles, where you're having to look at. I need to avoid this spike that's spinning, but I need to make sure I'm not landing on the spike. There's sometimes
Right.
hard to tell that. Um, but I think the gotcha machine, I think, is a really it works very well for this one. as a motivator for driving progression and all that stuff. And I think this game is especially made for people who like to be completionists. So
Right.
there's plenty for you to go back and do.
Oh, that's awesome. So, like, what are some other games that you would say are particularly good at UX design, and what do they do well?
Uh, that's really hard to say. There's so many games out there, and I think they all have, different feels and all that stuff. So, I mean, an experience for somebody might be the story. They may just really be driven by that stuff. Um, but then you look at Elden Ring, which has come out, and people are like, "Oh, it's so difficult, to get through this stuff. I don't understand where I am. I missed the tutorial, and yet it's my favorite game." Sometimes it's really hard to explain.
That's a
Right.
pretty interesting point because what seems like good UX design to one person may be a bad experience to another. So, I guess it's ultimately there's a level of subjectivity there.
Yeah, because I mean, me working on Call of Duty too, I'm not a first person shooter type of person. Like, I get seasick from this stuff, but I can still appreciate some of the things that they put into the game and the
Right.
level of passion and detail that, people put into this as players. But it's not my game, so I don't see it the same way that other folks will.
Sure.
So, for a genre that you don't particularly care for, how are you able to like contribute to that genre?
Well, I'm not working on the game, so I don't have to worry about too much of that side of things. But I am concerned about the players, so I need to understand more about the players. I do a lot of chatting with folks that are better at the game, so I can understand, how does this work? Um, what are I'm even just learning some of the terms that I don't always hear for first-person shooter language. But I still will go in and play the game myself. I will see what it's like to go in through um, the process of loading into a game, to matchmaking with folks, to playing as a new player versus people who are more experienced. Because I think it's a big challenge for a lot of games, especially in multiplayer games like that. Of the matchmaking, like, does it feel like you're evenly matched? Does it feel good as somebody that's new coming in with folks that are super, super experienced?
Very interesting. But yeah, I think that's all the questions I had. Did you have any other questions, Brian or Logan?
What are your primary frameworks currently being used in the UI UX space, do you think? And what are some good resources that you would personally recommend that people can look at with regards to getting better at those frameworks?
I mean, I'm not a programmer myself, so I don't think of things as frameworks, but tools that I use as a UX designer right now, Figma is a big one for folks, and I'm sure that you guys, even as a programmer, hopefully are utilizing things like the dev mode to be able to see, like, those precise measurements that you're doing, to be able to see the prototypes for how things interact and all that. So Figma is the big one right now. If you're working on the game side of things, the two larger engines that people are mostly working with, Unity and Unreal. If you can practice, navigating around that stuff, getting comfortable, as a UX or UI person, at least with implementing things, that's going to be super helpful. But I don't think you need to be, an expert coder or an engineer. It will help, but you don't need to be that if you're in this role.
Or actually, I did have another question. So, like, for a lot of the modern websites you visit, what are some user experience mistakes that a lot of companies make in terms of their websites?
For websites, hmm, well, I think the first thing that comes to mind is your experience of looking at something on desktop versus mobile. I think probably more people are getting better at this. And I mean, for me, I think the interesting thing about as a person who uses, my phone for web stuff and all the time. We have so many apps for everything these days. So if you're expecting your program or whatever you're building to use an app to take up space on your phone, consider how many other things are on a person's phone, how much space they have, and how much how important it is to them to have this thing versus everything else.
Sure.
So, what do you feel about like complexity overload? I feel like a lot of sites they're trying to stuff every bit of information they can, and there's like 30 options to click, and it ends up confusing the user. Do you believe that we should move towards more simplicity?
I think a little bit of that is almost a decision on how you want to present yourself, your brand, your game, whatever you want to do. Because you'll look at some things like, I don't know if you guys ever seen those soap uh, products, which just littered with words all over the whole thing. And that's what it's known for. That's how it's recognized because of, its wordiness and that complexity. And then there's other
Yeah.
folks who are like, let's keep it super simple. It's almost mysterious. You have to figure out all this stuff. So they're playing with the experience of things as well. So whether that's web, whether that's print, whether that's game stuff, they all kind of toy with that. But simplicity in the experience of getting through something, I think, is important. You don't want to take a bazillion steps to do something important. And then lose track of what you're doing, lose your progress, not have
Yeah, that's
something
huge.
saved.
That's huge.
So that's what I would recommend is uh, consider the complexity of it, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the presentation of it can't be complex too.
Right.
Awesome. Did you guys have any closing questions?
Yeah, I guess one question I would have is, because we have a pretty wide listener base of all different level developers and game designers and musicians, but what are some tips you would give to someone who's entry level, who's very green to the industry, wanting to break into games? What would you recommend that they do? What are some of the steps that they have to take to become successful in this industry?
So my experience getting into games probably shapes the way that I give this recommendation to folks. But while it helps to have training in the thing that you want to do, sometimes that doesn't always happen. Sometimes you don't always have the means to do it, or you're not in the right place to do it. But the most important thing is that you put yourself in the position to have that conversation with people. If I hadn't applied for that Craigslist role, I wouldn't have been in the game industry, and I didn't have training for all this stuff. But you
Right.
find the things that equate to that. You find the skills that you have, and how can you bring those to be an asset to the people that you're working with. So you don't necessarily have to be games focused, I think, if you're trying to break in. But it does definitely help to say, hey, I play games. I'm passionate about either this company, this type of game. Show your passion for this stuff because people are looking for people that are interested in the thing that they want to do.
Oh, absolutely.
But yeah, it was definitely awesome having you on the show. Did you want to leave our audience with any closing thoughts?
Oh, I don't know. That's probably the hardest question. Stay hydrated. Winter's coming. Bundle up.
Awesome, guys. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Thank you for coming on the show. We'll catch y'all next time.